Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into the video. We're going to be discussing some recent rumours concerning Nintendo's NX console. These rumours are numerous. They go from the performance of the machine down to the launch lineup and other bits and pieces besides, so stick with us. So these rumours do originate from NeoGaf, and it's actually from a verified poster. His name is 10K, so all credit goes to him for this. Essentially speaking, he's labelled these rumours as 4 tiers. So, for example, in his own words, T1, Tier 1, means one source told me this. Tier 2 means 2 sources. Tier 3 is 3 sources. And Tier 4, I think you can guess where we're going with this, at least 4 sources or more told him the same thing. Now, he does emphasise that a number, in terms of the tier, doesn't necessarily mean that a rumour is any more true or false. For example, one developer could have certain information that another one just doesn't have. But with that said, some of the rumours, especially regarding the performance of the machine, have actually been verified by several sources, so that's certainly something we're going to tackle first. 10K claims that on behalf of a lot of developers who have used the machine, and I quote, the NX will be more powerful than the PlayStation 4 by a noticeable amount. Now, there are some reports that the CPU is between 15 to 30% faster than the PlayStation 4's, and so he presumes that the GPU and other components, for example the RAM, would also match up in kind. It's worth noting that we don't know what the architecture of the CPU is, and we'll get more into that in just a moment. But what would this mean? Well, assuming that the GPU is about 15 to 40% faster, it will mean that the NX is capable of putting out about 2.1 teraflops to about 2.5, 2.6 teraflops. Once again, we're assuming 15 to 40%. Why am I going up to 40% with the GPU? Because it is possible that Nintendo will allow a slightly faster GPU if they're aiming for higher resolutions, because resolution is typically more GPU bound than CPU bound. But obviously, you know, it can depend on the application, regardless of which we should be looking at between the low 2 to mid 2 teraflops of computing performance, which is pretty good and compares to the PlayStation 4's 1.84. Now, I did mention that the architecture has not been confirmed. Specifically, this is whether the actual hardware, the CPU specifically, is going to be ARM based or whether it's going to be x86. I think it's very unlikely at this point we're going to see a PowerPC again, because I don't think I've seen any rumours that this is going to be the case. All rumours have pointed it's either going to be ARM or it's going to be x86. It's rather interesting because most of the recent rumours have pointed out that it will be x86, but according to 10K, some folks believe this is not true. And I quote, one thing that contradicts x86, and this is an indirect source, but a coder who works specifically for Nintendo laughed off Gaff's focus on x86, and we know nothing. Please don't go looking for them, Detective Gaff, let them keep their job, but that combined with ARM likely being in the handheld makes me believe that NX will use ARM, but like I said, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Now, what does he mean by it doesn't really matter? Well, what he's talking here specifically is about porting code over. So, for example, let's say you have a game running on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, PC, what have you. Those architectures are x86. What you need to do then is to make that code run on ARM. Now, I'm not going to get super technical with this video, but essentially speaking, most compilers, which are the applications which are responsible for turning your source code of your game, in other words, the actual programming language and all of the assets, that type of thing, and then compiling that and making it run on the architecture of your choice, most of those are capable of, well, making the transition to ARM. There can be some bug fixing, and it's definitely harder than if it was, let's say, x86 based to begin with, but with some recompiling, bug fixing, tweaking, testing, you can get most applications running on it, and ARM can run x64 code if it's translated correctly. That's the simple version of it. If someone wants to explain better in the comments, you're more than welcome, but I want to keep this video somewhat manageable. So, one thing that was quoted about is memory, because One of the really interesting things that we've heard a couple of times is that the system is going to be optimized for gaming. Now that's rather interesting because optimized for gaming, the PlayStation 4 is optimized for gaming, the Xbox One is optimized for gaming, right? I mean, let's face it, they're a single architecture. It's not like the PC where, for example, you have different drivers, you've got different bits of hardware. For example, if you've got an Nvidia card, have you got an AMD card? Which AMD card do you have? Which AMD CPU or Intel CPU do you have? Have you overclocked it? There's dozens of different factors, and of course modern APIs are doing a lot better, but even so, the reason the consoles are able to squeeze so much performance out of themselves, despite the fact that they're a lot weaker in terms of raw power than a PC, is the fact that, of course, it is optimized hardware. So what the hell can you bring out from the interpretation of saying it's optimized for games? One of those that I'm personally choosing to interpret for this is that, well, it's possible it's going to be very game focused. So what I mean by that is we might not see tons of streaming stuff. We might not see the ability to do loads of different applications and run those simultaneously. We know that in the case of the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One, they have roughly 5 gigabytes of memory available for games developers. I say roughly because in the case of the PlayStation 4 you've got the flexible memory, which is divided a little bit, and some flexible memory is allocated purely to the OS, and the OS controls that flexible memory on behalf of the game. So the game does use that flexible memory, but the developers do not control that memory directly, as far as what we understand, unless Sony have made some revisions to their SDKs, which is entirely possible because this information is a little old. Microsoft, same thing, about 5 gigabytes of memory, and we've seen various breakdowns from everyone from Guerrilla Games and whoever else, and they've basically shown what they've done with the memory, what's being used, for example, texture memory, what's being used for, let's say, artificial intelligence, for geometry, and all the other assets which go into making up the game. So right there you can listen that, hey, 5 gigabytes of 8 is available, right? So that means 3 gigabytes is unusable by games, once again assuming nothing's changed over the past several, well actually, about a year and a bit. Some of the SDKs leaked, didn't they? Regardless of which, it's possible that Nintendo could get away with either slightly less RAM, or they could decide to still use 8 gigabytes, but decide to give more of it a larger allocation. Let's say, for sake of this video, 6.5 gigabytes. I'm pulling out my butt. This is not rumours, no official rumours or anything like that. I'm just simply saying they could give 6.5 gigabytes of the memory. The rest could go on things such as system. These would be, for example, the dashboard, being able to control your friends. This would be drivers. This would be the, everything from online notifications all the way to being able to handle background downloads, that type of stuff. It all takes memory, as you know. So that's certainly one way to go. Now, moving on just for a little bit, if it is x86, and I know I'm going somewhat back on myself just for a moment, but I did forget to add this in regards to it being x86, the most logical provider is AMD. I'm not saying it is AMD, but all signs point to, if it was a company to provide this, it doesn't really make sense for it to be Intel. Nvidia, not so much. So AMD are really the only logical solution with an APU. Therefore, it could be a Polaris-based APU, 14nm for the sake of argument. That would make a lot of sense given the performance, in other words, the TDP that they're running in, the amount of wattage that the system can suck down, the amount of heat it can generate, that type of stuff. Really, if they're going to move towards the next generation architecture, which is Polaris, which has about 2 to 2.5 times performance per watt over the current 28nm. The 28nm, by the way, is the same architecture that's available on the desktops currently. This is going to change in the next several months, of course, as Polaris starts rolling out, and also on the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. Now, let's talk about games, because it doesn't matter how powerful the system is, it doesn't matter whether it's a re-release of the SNES or whether it's got 10 T-flops, it really doesn't matter if you have no games for it. One of the persisting rumours with the NX is we're going to see several ports from the Wii U to this machine. One of those is Zelda, and another is Smash, and supposedly these are 100% confirmed That's quote, by the way, 100% confirmed. Mario Maker is also being considered, along with Splatoon. Supposedly there's some problems migrating data with those two games, so I guess they're just working on it and seeing what happens. Let's face it, those games make a lot of sense. I have no issue with those being ported over. Supposedly, and I'm using that word a lot here, I don't want to tell you that it's a hard and fact truth. They are rumours, despite the fact that there have been multiple sources for this stuff. At the end of the day, it is still rumours. But supposedly, both Zelda and Smash will be hitting the launch window. Now, launch window is a bit of a tricky one. It doesn't necessarily mean launch day. It could be the day after launch, it could be on the day of launch, or it could be a couple of weeks after, or maybe even a month after or more after launch, because launch window is a bit of a wishy-washy term. But let's assume pretty much at launch, which makes a lot of sense because in the subject of Zelda, you wouldn't want to not have that game on the Wii U, on the NX, and considering that releasing two different versions of Zelda, one on the NX, one on the Wii U, with completely separate adventures would be pretty much a waste of time, and I think you'd piss off a lot of users, especially if the NX is not backwardly compatible. I'm making an assumption. And I also think it would upset a lot of Wii U owners if you basically lock them out of a game, especially if they can't afford to upgrade or don't want to upgrade at launch, which is fair enough if the new consoles come out. And Smash, once again, also very popular amongst a lot of folks. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a Mario Kart in the future, although that's not been confirmed or even rumoured yet, which is a bit surprising for me. I'm actually pretty good with that. I think it's a good idea because those are four of the big games for the Wii U. I think having them ported over to the NX is a very good move. It's smart, it's efficient, and honestly, it gets more people gives more people, the opportunity to play the games, which is, well, a good thing, right? Now, I do want to go over just a couple of last details while I've got you. The first is that the handheld is more mysterious, if that's possible, of the two systems. Now, NX has been referred to as the handheld and as the main console, the one that you plug into your TV or what have you. But the weird thing is none of the sources that 10K has spoken to, and in fact it's the same for pretty much anyone on the internet, we don't know what the hell the NX is referring to when it comes to the handheld. So, in fact, it's so bad, or so wishy-washy if you prefer, that we don't even know if NX is the handheld. For example, is it NX is just the project name as a whole? So for example, NX is like the combined effort of the handheld and the console. Is NX just referring to the console? We just don't know. Another thing that's rather weird, and I'll read this out verbatim, this is once again from 10K, and he says, and I quote, "It's speculated that we will still get some exclusive games, but won't get many games downported," referring to the shared games library, while the console could theoretically play them all, maybe lending support to x86 and ARM inside the NX, having the handheld guts inside, but that sounds very expensive and I doubt it. The console seems to be the main focus for Nintendo right now, and the new 3DS, along with the 2016 lineup of the 3DS, has afforded them that luxury. So in other words, he's saying, well, it's possible that the NX handheld is being developed, but it's not going to be available during the same launch period. To be fair to Nintendo, if you were to take a look at the sales figures of the 3DS, despite the fact that everyone had assumed that by now mobile gaming would have sucked the life out of any handhelds, I think it's fair to say that the 3DS has done really bloody well for itself, and Nintendo possibly doesn't want to potentially disrupt a really good source of revenue, so maybe they'll introduce the handheld, the new handheld next year, especially after they've released, of course, the new 3DS and all of that stuff, so people are a bit sore about that, so they may want to hold things off, especially when they've got a good product lineup. Now, one last thing, do remember that the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One are having many rumours, mensy rumours, that they're going to have upgraded models. So the PS4.5/PlayStation 4K, whatever you want to call it, is going to offer a GPU that's about twice the performance as the vanilla machine. These are all but confirmed rumours now, and by which I mean Sony haven't confirmed them, but multiple developers have confirmed that they've seen the machine in action. and we've done an in-depth analysis of that. So that's going to be quite interesting, because if that's true, the NX is not going to technically be the fastest system. The I guess you could say the PS4K, the upgraded machine, is going to be the fastest, whereas the NX is going to basically slap the original PS4, the vanilla model. And speaking of vanilla models, there's a new rumour, of course, that the Xbox One is also going to have an upgrade. Now, yes, Phil Spencer downplayed this and basically said no, it's not happening, but there have been a couple of filings over at the FTC which basically highlight that, yeah, it might actually be the case. Sorry, not FTC, FCC, excuse me. And basically they've said that one is looking like a revision of the Xbox One, and the other one is potentially an entire new version of the Xbox One. But once again, this is not confirmed, and you can take those rumours with a pinch of salt, a truckload of salt, or a bloody continent of salt if you prefer. It's just a really weird time in the industry, and I think that 2016 / coming into 2017 are going to be really interesting. I want to know what Sony are going to do, and I really want to know how Nintendo are going to respond to all of this. I think it's going to be a really cool time in the industry. Anyway, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. As usual, if you've enjoyed it, feel free to share the video. It would mean a lot. If you can subscribe if you've enjoyed it, then